All right, let's just dive right into this explainer and piece together the deeply tragic, yet honestly endlessly fascinating story of the RMS Titanic's maiden voyage. This is a story that has absolutely captivated the world for over a century now. And today, we're going to sift through the facts, the timelines, and the incredibly fateful decisions that led up to one of the most infamous nights in human history. We're going to break down exactly what happened step by step.
Just think about this single powerful word for a second: unsinkable. When the White Star Line built what was widely considered the most luxurious, most advanced ship ever constructed, that word, unsinkable, it wasn't just some clever marketing slogan. It was a deeply ingrained, completely accepted belief. When a Titanic set sail from Southampton to New York City on April 14, 1912, it was the absolute peak of human engineering, the ultimate pride of the Gilded Age. People genuinely believed we had finally conquered the oceans. But as we're going to see, that exact overconfidence was the foundational flaw that sealed its fate.
To really understand the disaster, we first have to understand the ship itself. So, part one, the unsinkable legend.
It's like two
where
completely
different worlds were stacked on top of each other. Up above deck, everything was flawlessly calm. You had wealthy passengers enjoying these massive grand dining halls, live music, and truly opulent rooms. I mean, it was literally the height of high society just floating on the ocean. But right beneath their feet, totally different reality. Down below, hundreds of workers were constantly toiling away in these incredibly harsh, punishing conditions, shoveling coal just to keep those giant engines running day and night. That serene floating palace up top was entirely dependent on the relentless hidden labor down below. It's a stark divide, right? Aesthetic luxury was heavily
But while the
prioritized over
surface of
practical
life
reality.
on board seemed perfectly fine, a very real threat was waiting for them. This brings us to part two: warnings in the
Now,
dark.
this is
and a
where the
hidden
timeline
danger.
gets incredibly frustrating. Throughout the day of April 14th, the Titanic actually received several warnings from nearby ships. And these weren't just casual, minor alerts. They were specific warnings about massive floating icebergs directly in the ship's path. Yet, they just kept up their high speed, charging right through the freezing ocean. The warnings were essentially brushed aside because of this massive systemic pressure to maintain an impressive pace and, well, live up to that invincible reputation. Plus, the conditions that night were completely deceptive. The sea was unusually flat and calm. Now, that sounds like a good thing, right? But actually, scratch that, it's terrible, because it meant there were no waves breaking against the bases of the icebergs to give them away in the dark.
builds
To a devastating climax. Part 3, the fatal collision at 11:40
Try
p.m.
to imagine the sudden, terrifying shift in reality. It's exactly 11:40 p.m. The weird calm of the night is just completely shattered. Two lookout sailors staring out into the pitch black suddenly spot a massive iceberg directly in front of them. You can almost hear the sheer panic as they frantically ring the warning bell and scream, "Iceberg right ahead!" Down on the bridge, the crew leaps into action, making this desperate attempt to turn the massive ship. But physics doesn't care about the Titanic's reputation. The ship was just too large and was traveling way too fast. Seconds later, the iceberg violently scraped tore open multiple compartments deep beneath the waterline. And just like that, the ship's fate was sealed. The crazy part? Up in the luxury cabins, a lot of passengers barely even noticed the collision at first. Some even went out and joked about it, literally picking up chunks of ice from the deck. But deep below, where those workers had been feeding the engines, freezing water was rapidly pouring in. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was actually on board, and when he went down to assess the damage, he immediately realized the terrifying mathematical truth. The unsinkable Titanic was doomed.
As that chilling
It was going to
reality
sink within
slowly
hours.
crept from the bottom of the ship to the top, the whole atmosphere transformed. Part 4, panic in lifeboats, and
slow,
chaos. Totally paralyzing panic began to spread as the crew started prepping the lifeboats. Crew members started shouting that historic, heartbreaking command, women and children first. And this led to just agonizing scenes on deck. Families were forcibly separated, having absolutely no idea if they ever see each other again. Through all this absolute chaos, the ship's musicians bravely kept playing their instruments in a desperate attempt to keep everyone calm. But here is the most profound, fatal failure of the entire night. The Titanic literally did not carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. They prioritized pretty deck space over human lives. And because the whole unsinkable myth was so deeply drilled into everyone's heads, early on, a lot of passengers refused to leave the giant ship. Tragically, many of those precious limited lifeboats were lowered into the freezing water,
Which
half
leads
empty.
us straight to the chilling conclusion. Part 5. The Tragic Legacy and the Final
As the
Moments.
night got colder and darker, the front of the Titanic slowly, unstoppably disappeared beneath the ocean, which raised the massive rear of the ship high into the air. Then, at around 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the lights just suddenly went out. The immense stress on the hull became too much, and the giant ship literally broke apart, vanishing into the freezing Atlantic Ocean forever. The rescue ship, the RMS Carpathia, was rushing to get there, but they wouldn't arrive to save the survivors bobbing in the lifeboats until hours
to
later.
really let this number sink in. More than 1,500. That's how many people lost their lives in the freezing waters that night. This disaster completely shocked the entire globe. It just shattered the illusion of human technological supremacy overnight. It instantly became, and still remains today, one of the deadliest maritime tragedies in recorded history. A brutal consequence. And it leaves us with this final, powerful question to mull over. The sinking of the Titanic isn't just a historical event. It is a stark, lasting reminder of a universal truth. No matter how advanced our tech gets, no matter how unsinkable we loudly declare our creations to be, the indifferent power of the natural world is absolute. It really forces us to ask, will we ever truly learn that nature is always stronger than human pride? Keep that in mind as you reflect on the incredible, tragic story we just covered. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it brought this complex piece of history into a clearer, more human focus for you.